When desperate and starving widow Justina Vernon accepts marriage to a drifting, poverty-stricken ranch hand who promises only survival, she expects hardship. But after 3 days riding through Montana's Bitterroot Mountains, Dustin Talbott leads her to a fortified compound guarded by armed men and calls himself commander. And powerful men want them all destroyed.
Hello, compliments of the season. If you love heartwarming stories about life in times past, then you'd enjoy these stories. Comment where you're watching from, like and share these videos with loved ones as you enjoy them. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel too. My team and I have something free and beautiful for you once we hit the 1,000 subscriber mark. It will be shared in the community. You know, we go to great lengths to make these videos, and your support means a lot to us. Therefore, we plan to give back to you once we are able to, so be a part of what we are building.
The wind cut through Billings like a knife that spring morning in 1878. Justina Vernon sat on the edge of a narrow bed in Mrs. Howell's boarding house, counting coins that would not be enough. 23 cents. The rent was $2, due yesterday. Her hands trembled as she let the coins fall back into the small cloth purse. She was 26 and already a widow. 6 months had passed since the mine collapse took her husband, Samuel, along with 4 other men. The company paid nothing. They said it was God's will, as if God signed their pay slips. Samuel had left only debts that followed Justina like shadows, growing longer each day. Through the thin walls, she heard Mrs. Howell's heavy footsteps climbing the stairs. Justina stood quickly, smoothing her faded gray dress. The fabric had been washed so many times it felt like paper against her skin. The knock was sharp. "Mrs. Vernon?" Justina opened the door. Mrs. Howell stood there, arms crossed, her face set like stone. "The rent." "I'm working extra hours at the laundry," Justina said quietly. "I can pay you by week's end." "That's what you said last week." Mrs. Howell's eyes were not unkind, but they were tired. "I've got bills too. If you can't pay by tomorrow, you'll need to find somewhere else." Justina nodded, because there was nothing else to do. Mrs. Howell left, and the door clicked shut like the sound of a lock turning. Justina sat back down. Through the window, she could see the muddy street below, men on horses, wagons rolling past. Somewhere in this town there had to be work that paid more than pennies. Somewhere there had to be a way forward that did not end in the street. But she could not see it. Dustin Talbott had appeared the next morning like an answer to a prayer Justina had not spoken. He stood in Mrs. Howell's parlor with his hat in his hands, his clothes worn but clean. His eyes were blue and steady, and when he spoke, his voice was calm. "I've heard of your situation," he said. "I'm looking for a wife. I can offer safety and a roof, not wealth, but enough." Justina studied him. He was tall, lean from hard work, with sun-darkened skin and calloused hands. There was something careful in the way he stood, like a man who had learned to measure his movements. "Why me?" she asked. "Because you need help," he said simply, "and because I need someone who understands that life is not always easy." 2 days later, they were married by a circuit preacher who asked no questions. Justina packed her few belongings into a canvas bag, and they rode out of Billings on sturdy horses with simple supplies tied behind their saddles. The first night they camped under open sky. Dustin built a small fire with quick hands and cooked beans in a tin pot. They ate in silence, and Justina watched him across the flames. He moved with quiet competence, checking the horses, scanning the darkness beyond their small circle of light. "How far is your place?" she asked. 3 days, he said, maybe 4, depending on weather. The second day they climbed higher into the mountains. Pine forests grew thick around them, and the air turned sharp and cold. Justina noticed things, the way Dustin knew every trail without hesitation, the way he read the sky like a book, the way he handled his rifle with the ease of long practice. On the third night, he stared at the stars, then turned to her. "Tomorrow changes everything," he said. The trail climbed through morning mist until it crested a final ridge. Dustin stopped his horse and Justina pulled alongside him. What she saw below made her breath catch in her throat. A hidden valley spread wide and green between the mountains. A clear stream ran through its center, flashing silver in the sunlight. But it was not the valley that stunned her. A massive timber fortress sat at the heart of the meadow. Walls rose 15 feet high, built from whole logs fitted tight. Guard towers stood at the corners, and she could see men moving along the parapets. Smoke rose from buildings inside the compound. Gardens stretched in neat rows. Livestock grazed in fenced pastures. This was no cabin. This was something else entirely. "What is this place?" Justina whispered. Dustin's jaw tightened. "Home." They rode down the slope. As they approached, a man in a worn jacket stepped forward from the gate. He carried a rifle but raised his hand in greeting. When he saw Dustin, he straightened. "Commander Talbott," he said, relief plain in his voice. "Welcome home. Everything's been quiet." Commander. The word hit Justina like a stone. She turned slowly to look at Dustin, questions rising in her throat faster than she could speak them. The gate swung open. Inside, people emerged from buildings, women, children, men of different ages. She saw Salish families in traditional dress. She saw black families who watched her with cautious eyes. She saw Chinese men who worked near a forge. Dozens of people, all living here, hidden in the mountains. The great hall rose 2 stories, built with skill and care. There were storage buildings, an infirmary, what looked like a schoolhouse. This was not a homestead. This was a community. Dustin dismounted and turned to her. Fear flickered in his eyes. "I need to explain everything," he said. What happens when Justina learns the truth about Haven's Gate? Subscribe to find out what Dustin has been hiding and why powerful men want this place destroyed. Inside the commander's quarters, Dustin stood by the window, his back to her. The room was simple but solid. A desk, a bed, maps on the walls marked with careful notes. "My full name is Dustin Talbott Grayson," he said finally. "I was an Army scout for 6 years. I saw things that made me ashamed to wear the uniform." He turned to face her. Massacres, families driven from land they'd lived on for generations, Chinese workers beaten and left to die beside the rails they built, escaped people hunted down like animals even though the war was over. His voice stayed steady, but his hands curled into fists. "I couldn't stop it, but I could build something different." "Haven's Gate," Justina said quietly. 5 years ago, I left the army and bought this valley with money I'd saved, started bringing people here, displaced Salish families with nowhere to go, black families traveling north to Canada who needed shelter, Chinese railway workers who fled before they were killed. He looked at her directly. "I went to Billings looking for someone who wouldn't see this place as criminal, someone who understood what it meant to lose everything." Justina stood and walked to the maps on the wall. She traced the valley's borders with her finger. "How many people live here?" 53, 16 families, some individuals. "And you've kept this secret for 5 years?" "We've had to." Justina thought of the boarding house, of counting pennies, of Mrs. Howell's tired eyes. She thought of Samuel dying in a mine that paid nothing when he fell. She thought of all the people who had no one to catch them when the world pushed them off the edge. "You didn't deceive me," she said. "You were testing me." Dustin nodded slowly. I needed someone who could see broken people and not turn away. Justina met his gaze. Then show me everything. For 3 days, Justina walked through Haven's Gate and listened. Clara, a widow with 3 children, told her about escaping Missouri after her husband was killed for trying to vote. Joseph, an elderly Salish healer, spoke quietly about watching his people forced from their land twice before. Way, barely 20, showed her scars on his back from railway foremen who worked Chinese laborers until they dropped. These were not criminals, they were survivors. On the 4th morning, a rider came fast from Fort Missoula. Dustin met him at the gate, and Justina watched his face change as he read the paper the man handed him. When he returned, he called a meeting in the great hall. Everyone gathered, faces tense. They had seen riders before. Judge Silas Merrick has arrived at Fort Missoula with federal marshals, Dustin said. His voice stayed calm, but Justina heard the edge beneath it. I've brought Cornelius Dutton, the railway man. They claim this land is federal territory, and we're squatters. Murmurs ran through the crowd. Clara pulled her children closer. They're giving us 7 days to evacuate. After that, they'll use force. An older man stood. Where would we go? There's nowhere left. Dustin had no answer for that. Justina saw something she had not seen before in his eyes. Doubt. That night she stood on the wall watching stars appear above the peaks. Dustin came to stand beside her. The railway wants this valley, he said quietly. Dutton's Northern Pacific Line needs it for a route through the mountains, millions of dollars at stake. Merritt controls the territorial courts. He'll rule whatever serves power. Then we fight, she said. With what? They have the law. Justina turned to him. The law has words. Words can be read different ways. My husband was a surveyor. I learned to read deeds and claims when he couldn't. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we find the words that save us.
Adelaide Dutton arrived on the 5th day with 6 armed men as escort. She rode a white mare and wore a traveling dress the color of midnight blue. Her blonde hair was pinned perfectly despite the mountain wind. Dustin met her at the gate. Justina stood beside him. "Dustin," Adelaide said, her voice smooth as silk over stone, "Father sent me to speak reason before things turn unpleasant." "Your father wants to destroy 53 lives for a railway shortcut?" Dustin replied. Adelaide's eyes moved to Justina, measuring her like livestock at auction. "And you must be the unfortunate woman he married in his rustic phase." Justina said nothing. Adelaide dismounted gracefully. "I'll be direct. Father will relocate these people humanely if you cooperate. But you, Mrs. Vernon, you're clearly out of your depth here. I'm authorized to offer you $500 to leave quietly. Dustin can marry someone appropriate, and you'll be comfortable in San Francisco or anywhere you choose." The insult landed cleanly. Justina felt it like a slap, the assumption that she could be bought, that she was temporary, that she did not belong. "I married a man who shelters the helpless," Justina said quietly. "You are offering me money to abandon honor. The answer is no." Adelaide's smile thinned. "Then you'll lose it all together." She mounted her horse. 7 days, Dustin. Think carefully." After she left, Justina went to Dustin's quarters and searched his papers. At the bottom of a trunk, she found old surveying documents. Her hands shook as she recognized the firm name. Gallagher and Vernon Surveying, Samuel's company. The coordinates matched Haven's Gate Valley perfectly. "Dustin," she called, "when did you buy this land?" 1875. Used my full legal name." Justina looked up, hope sparking. "Then we have proof." Will Justina's discovery save Haven's Gate, or is Judge Merrick's power too great?
Subscribe to see how a widow's courage stands against corruption. The territorial courthouse in Helena rose 3 stories of red brick and white columns. Justina climbed its steps beside Dustin, her heart beating against her ribs like a trapped bird. She wore her best dress, a deep brown cotton that Clara had helped her press. It was plain compared to the silks and satins filling the benches inside. Adelaide sat in the front row, emerald green dress catching the light from tall windows. Beside her, Cornelius Dutton looked every inch the powerful man he was. Silver-haired, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that cost more than Havensgate fed itself for a month. Judge Silas Merrick presided from the bench. His face was lean and sharp, his eyes cold as January wind. Federal marshals stood at attention along the walls. "This hearing will determine land rights and legality of occupation," Merrick announced. His voice carried authority that expected no challenge. Dutton stood first. He unrolled railway maps across a table. "Gentlemen, progress requires difficult decisions. The Northern Pacific Line needs this valley for a critical mountain passage. Our surveys show the land is unclaimed federal territory." He called witnesses. Railway surveyors testified with confident voices. They showed maps, quoted regulations, spoke of national interest in economic growth. Justina watched Dustin's jaw tighten. His hands rested flat on the table, but she saw his knuckles go white. Merrick made notes, nodding occasionally. "And the occupants?" "Squatters, Your Honor," Dutton said. "Some likely fugitives. The defendant has been harboring them illegally for years." Then Adelaide took the stand. She spoke softly, like someone performing reluctant duty. "Dustin Talbott deceived this poor woman, Your Honor. He used a false name when they married." Merrick leaned forward. "Explain." "He signed the marriage certificate as Dustin Talbott. His full legal name is Dustin Talbott Grayson. The marriage is fraudulent." Whispers ran through the courtroom like wind through wheat. Justina felt the trap closing.
Merrick lifted the marriage certificate, examining it with theatrical care. "Mrs. Vernon, it appears you've been deceived. We can help you annul this fraudulent union and—" "May I present evidence, Your Honor?" Justina stood, her voice cutting through the murmurs. Merrick paused, surprised. "The widow wishes to speak?" "I do." Justina stepped forward, carrying a leather folder Samuel had used for surveying documents. Her hands were steady now. Fear had burned away, leaving only purpose. She placed papers on the table. "These are certified land deeds, dated 1875. They show legal purchase of the valley in question." Merrick's eyes narrowed. "The railway surveys?" "Were conducted in 1877, 2 years after this land was legally purchased." Justina pointed to the signature line, "By Dustin Talbott Grayson, his full legal name." The courtroom stirred. Dutton's face went pale. "As for my marriage," Justina continued, "the certificate bears the name Dustin Talbott, which is indeed part of his full legal name. No deception occurred. Would you void every marriage where a man uses a shortened name?" Adelaide's expression cracked. Merrick stood. "You have no legal standing in territorial matters." Justina produced a sealed envelope. "Governor Potts appointed me territorial mediator for indigenous relations 4 days ago. The appointment is valid and grants me standing in cases affecting displaced populations." The rear doors opened. Colonel Nathan Pierce entered in full Army uniform, boots echoing on wooden floors. "Your Honor, I can verify Commander Grayson's military record and Havensgate's critical role in maintaining regional peace." Pierce testified clearly. Havensgate had prevented conflicts, protected both settlers and natives, created stability in volatile territory. The territorial judge, separate from Merrick, reviewed documents with careful attention. Finally, he spoke. The land is legally owned. The marriage is valid. This case is dismissed." Merrick stood frozen, rage burning in his eyes. "This isn't over," he whispered. 2 weeks later, Justina and Dustin rode back into the valley as evening painted the peaks gold and purple. The gates of Haven's Gate stood open and people poured out to meet them. Clara's children ran forward, shouting of joy. Joseph raised his hand in blessing. We and the other men clapped and cheered. The news had traveled ahead of them. Haven's Gate was safe, legal, protected. That night, a feast filled the great hall. Laughter echoed off timber walls. Children played while adults shared stories and plans for the future. More families were already traveling to join them, word spreading through quiet networks that a safe place existed in the mountains. Later, Justina stood on the fortress wall with Dustin, watching stars appear one by one above the Bitterroot peaks. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke and the promise of snow still weeks away. "I thought I was rescuing you," Dustin said quietly. "I was wrong." Justina took his hand. "You were rescuing me, but I rescued you back." He turned to face her. "I chose you because you'd lost everything and still kept fighting. I needed someone who understood that. I thought I was marrying poverty. Instead, I found something worth fighting for." Below them, lamplight glowed in windows. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Voices drifted up, speaking different languages that somehow fit together in this hidden valley. Haven's Gate had become more than shelter. It had become home. Dustin pulled her close. "We're expanding the school building next spring. More families coming means more children." Justina smiled. "Then we'd better get started." She had married a ranch hand to survive one winter. Instead, she'd become a commander's partner and helped dozens of families survive forever. The mountains kept what they honored, and Haven's Gate would endure. Did Justina's story move you? Subscribe for more tales of courage in the Old West, where love and justice fight against impossible odds.
If you enjoyed this latest story on life in the Old Wild West, then I'm sure you will love the next one coming up. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you can get updates on time. Did I tell you we post new, exciting, heartwarming stories daily? Subscribe now to join us so you won't miss any new stories.